And now, It's Just a Show presents a very special with your hosts, Adam and Beth.
This time we watched the first annual Summer Blockbuster review.
Yes! Finally, a chance to revisit the heights of the summer of 1997 with such blockbuster action films as Batman and Robin, The Lost World, and Contact?
So this isn't an Oscar preview. This one is a summer blockbuster review to kind of reach out to contemporary moviegoers.
Yes, and it's funny going back to how these things came out. We were talking on the last one about how the Oscar special of the Comedy Central years was this kind of peace offering between Best Brains and Comedy Central. It was some extra programming to smooth things over and maybe surrendered to a couple of demands from the network. We don't really know the full story there. But what we do know is that this first annual Summer Blockbuster review, and at least one of the specials to follow on the Sci-Fi Era, was done because of their enthusiastic push for getting MST3K. Because if you remember, this aired late in Season 8, and for all of Season 8, Sci-Fi is really trying to build up the fact that they have this property that they're so into and they want it to flourish and succeed.
Right, and from the Best Brains perspective, this really feels like the dry run for riff tracks.
Yes. It's also probably why the special isn't great.
In that they are in the theater. Last time they weren't. They were just outside in the host segment space. And so they are actually riffing off of the previews and clips. And often they're quite funny. But it does seem like they're kind of dabbling their toes in what it's like to actually hit a movie people have heard about, a movie that has done well at the box office, and to see if that kind of riffing still works in these contexts.
Well, I think one of the reasons why this suffers is because they have to set up the clip so many times.
Right.
And that's really distracting, and it sort of takes away from not only the jokes that follow, but like the time that they have to make jokes. It's weird, but also it's like much like riff tracks and my disinterest in it is that it's like, I don't care about jokes made about Men in Black. Like, why would I want to sit and watch like a riffed version of Men in Black? Men in Black isn't interesting. A movie that no one has heard of, made by fools and miscreants, is bound to be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is you can feel the enthusiasm in the players here. Like, is a lot of energy here. There's a lot of renewed energy here. I would even say with the last special, there's a sense of doom about it. Everyone seems very optimistic here. I feel like everyone's trying to bring their A game. They're trying new ideas out, and it's kind of nice to have that feeling going into one of these reviews, which often, as we'll go on, feel like nobody really wants to be doing them.
Well, it's certainly odd, and I guess an interesting visual experiment to see them in the theater, fully lit, front on. Like to actually see them just sitting there, usually to set up clips or sometimes make a joke between segments and commercials. But once again, not unlike the little gold statue preview special, I feel like we've walked away from a lot of the things that make MST3K special. And it's just, hey, we're watching clips of new movies. Aren't these new movies bad? This isn't exactly like compelling content.
No, not exactly. But I mean, and they, tried to use this as an opportunity to introduce some of their new characters like Bobo and Pearl. And of course, Bobo is always terrible, but I did like the running joke where he's just carrying around really sticky things. Getting them all over the crown like malt extract and corn syrup. I always like Pearl, and I felt like she was more Pearl-esque in this special than she usually is, and that she doesn't care about anybody and just wants to kind of get her rocks off. In this case, to George Clooney. I like that. This is a lady who wanted Crow, or Art at the time, to read her a dirty book.
Oh yeah, no, that's fine. It's not so much the character, so much as the phrasing. But yeah. Pearl was weirdly best served character-wise in the sci-fi era the few times she showed up in the theater, like in Quest for the Delta Knights.
Mm-hmm.
And that's totally fine. I wish it had been. It's like, oh, joining us for no reason whatsoever is Pearl. I have an extremely low tolerance for Bobo hijinks, so I didn't really get much out of that. But it is also, in a weird way, I guess, a bit of foreshadowing, too, for cinematic Titanic, which made great use of Mary Jo sitting in the theater and what her personality is like as a riffer, where she is, I think, quite dry and again, playing to her strengths as being someone to deliver, I think, dry, cutting remarks. So it's a fascinating glimpse of, it's like, oh, well, what would it be like if Mary Jo had hosted the show?
Mm-hmm.
And she's great. It's really good to see her.
Yeah, she's solid.
Mm-hmm.
Another interesting observation I'd say is that as these specials go on, Mike gets more and more involved. And in this one, he's still kind of not so much there. It's still very much like Tom and Crow's show. And Mike doesn't do much. And I actually think that suits the format, just to focus on on the bots and not get the human involved too much. That said, can you explain to me what was so funny about thinking that Mike was Jonathan Frakes?
I can't, because one, that isn't funny, and two,
No.
In no universe would Mike Nelson ever be mistaken for the luscious tube of meat that is Jonathan Frakes, with his first choice haircutter's haircut and his perfectly cut beard and his inimitable way of sitting in a chair.
Maybe we should talk about the movies themselves. They do a lot less in this one than they did in the last special. I think they only do 5 or 6, really, which means that they can spend more time riffing on them to various effects, and we can talk more about what we remember about them.
Yeah, so I guess first up, we have the best movie featured.
Yep.
Which was Luc Besson's The Fifth Element. A misunderstood movie at the time.
I have a lot of affection for this movie. I thought their jokes were also very reminiscent of riff tracks in that they're kind of lazy and xenophobic.
Yeah, surprise.
Look at this crazy Frenchman.
And that tends to be it, or just, riffing on the fact that Mila Jovovich is nude. But it's weird because you can comment on that, yet you can't show that. So unless the audience has seen The Fifth Element, which you and I would have when this special aired even, no one knows what they're talking about.
Right.
It's a bizarre joke to include, because it's not like Lilu is a sexual character. She's nude as an innocent. Like, she's a love interest at the very, very end, because of course the fifth element is love in, admittedly, the movie's weaker third act. Because the first 2 acts are so good that, much like Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street, everyone conveniently forgets that the movie hits the bed in like the last half hour.
Right.
So that last half hour is corny.
Right, and I'm not even a big Bruce Willis fan.
No, but he's very good in this.
He is very good.
Like, you see what's charming about him. It's like vintage moonlighting, atomic Shakespeare Bruce Willis.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, Luc Besson has returned to this well a few times, like the future sci-fi, and it has not gone very well, but I'm always going to be rooting for the guy, because I thought this was really imaginative.
Yeah, and I didn't see The Adventures of Gwendolyn and Vinegar, or whatever the hell the last movie he made along these lines was, because I don't think anybody did.
Right.
But I want that to succeed. I wanted The Fifth Element to succeed, and it got, I guess, the best of both worlds, or the worst of both worlds, depending on how you look at it. And that it was not a financial success, but it resonated with a lot of people, and it's still loved and fondly remembered as it is to this day. It's a lasting success, which, in all you have money is definitely something you want.
I only finally watched The Fifth Element a few months ago.
Whoa.
And it was very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ain't it a fun picture?
Yeah. And then I watched this again, and then they were very dumb.
Yeah.
About it, and I got very annoyed, very, very annoyed with them.
This is why I don't watch riff tracks, because that's what I've come to expect. Sidebar, and maybe this is worth double checking, because was The Fifth Element nominated for costume Oscars? Because it should have been. What movie of 1997 had better costumes than The Fifth Element? I tell you, none.
For the Academy Awards, it was only nominated for Best Sound Editing.
That's crazy. The sound editing, The Fifth Element, is notoriously poor. The costumes.
The opera singer, like, that's an incredible costume. That was not CGI.
And that was a beautiful design. And like, even though it's like, yes, it's just a blue lady wearing headpieces and stuff. Like, I get that it might not seem as terrific if you see like a picture of it. It works so beautifully in the movie, and the movie's use of color is so good. I mean, this film deserves a cinematography Oscar. This is why you can't take the Oscars seriously, because nothing was given to The Fifth Element, except maybe sound editing. We don't know. That was lost to time.
It did not win. It did not win.
No.
On the other hand, something that is extremely forgettable, and I've actually never seen and don't want to, The Lost World, Jurassic Park.
Well, fortunately, Beth, we live in a time when both Jurassic World and Jurassic World 2 World Harder exist. Because there was a time in which The Lost World Jurassic Park was the worst product with the Jurassic Park name on it. But no more! Not even the Game Boy game is as embarrassing as the Jurassic World movies.
I was just becoming aware enough and sophisticated enough as a consumer that I took one look at it, and it's just like everything that I love about Jurassic Park, and I love that movie a lot, looks like it's destroyed in this movie. So I'm not going to watch it. Like, I could even tell that from the preview. I mean, Ian Malcolm, played by Jeff Goldblum.
Well, he's prominent in the movie.
Now, this is the problem. It was such a genius move to have Ian Malcolm being played by Jeff Goldblum, because he was slightly removed from everything that was happening. He was this sarcastic, intellectual, cerebral guy who kind of didn't care what was going on. Like, even when he got injured or he was about to be eaten by a Tyrannosaurus, he always had like a quip, and they made him the hero, which means he has to be serious and he has to be active, and that's just not the character.
I don't remember the character being that laconic. Mostly I remember his delightful laugh, which later got immortalized as a remix in YouTube days.
And the wonderful line, "Now that is one big pile of shit."
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot to like about the original Jurassic Park, which I find to be one of Spielberg's better movies. Not as good as Duel, though. You gotta give that to Duel, or that Columbo movie he made. But this is a bland movie. Lost World Jurassic Park is a very bland movie. And the only reason I think it got made, other than the fact that Jurassic Park made a ton of money, a sequel with source material already existed. And the only person saying no to everybody from the first film, or anyone who wanted to come back, getting an even bigger payday, would have potentially been Steven Spielberg. Like a lot of directors who are pressured into making sequels they may or may not want to make, they go ahead. The only thing that is potentially fun about it is that it's always been rumored that Spielberg was interested in adapting and making a Godzilla movie. And had a fondness for the Toho monsters and wanted to do that on a Hollywood scale. And we briefly get that when we get monsters running around San Francisco, and I believe that is an explicit reference to Toho monsters showing up in San Fran in Destroy All Monsters. But that's about it. And really the only thing you get out of that is a joke that is worthy of the Roland Emmerich Godzilla, where a bunch of Japanese tourists run away from the Tyrannosaurus Rex and point and scream.
Another thing that really struck me about The Lost World is that the dinosaurs look worse. I think, and this is completely out of my ass, so I don't know for sure, but I think they used a lot more animatronic dinosaurs in the original Jurassic Park.
Yes,
and they switched to CGI for this one, and it looks like garbage.
Yeah, well, that's just it. The Lost World is a case of Jurassic Park buying its own hype in a way, because people made a huge deal of the CGI in Jurassic Park, and there isn't actually that much of it. Most of those are puppets. Most of those are animatronic.
Huh, okay.
the CGI really came in when the initial plan to use stop motion didn't produce realistic enough movements, as stop motion never does. That's one of its charms. If you ever see the test footage from the Jurassic Park dinosaurs, it's fantastic to look at.
We should try to find it, put in the show notes.
Oh Lord, I could watch the claymation raptors walk all day. If only I could make that my screensaver. But yes, I think that either too much confidence in CGI or simply relying on it to paper over scenes because of, I think, a shorter turnaround in production time, something resulted in more CGI. And in the late 90s, you really have directors thinking, oh, this will save us because CGI looks really incredible in Terminator 2.
Right, but it was just a bunch of goo.
Yeah, it looks great when you're trying to create something that doesn't look realistic in any way. Like if you're playing with like textures, then CGI can do wonders. But when you're creating things that are supposed to be there and you're lingering on them for a long time, CGI looked bad then. And watching even more recent movies, like say Annihilation, that features CGI creatures, still looks bad.
It still looks bad.
Yeah.
You can't rely on it for every special effect.
Get Rick Baker, Rob Bottin on the phone. They'll make you a monster. Come on.
Well, on that note,
Now to history's greatest monster, Will Smith.
The Men in Black, this is another one that used a lot of CGI.
Mm-hmm.
Not quite to the same effect because it was more cartoony. I remember liking this movie at the time. I do not like it anymore.
Can you remember a single thing about Men in Black?
I liked when, what's his face?
Tommy Lee Jones, Will Smith, Rip Torn.
No, Vic
Tayback.
Yeah, Vic
No,
Tayback
not Vic
is back.
He was just becoming a big deal at the time.
Oh, Vincent D'Onofrio.
He's the main cockroach guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was one of Vincent D'Onofrio's first movie, and he is a very good cockroach wearing a man suit.
Yes, this is I guess a little bit of a peek as to what a Joe's Apartment sequel would have looked like. Man in Black, I remember even at the time, it's one of the earliest memories I have of watching something and feeling too old for it.
Oh, interesting.
Because Man in Black, yeah, this is 97, so I would have been 14. And I was sitting down and watching this, and I was like, oh, this is just a shitty Ghostbusters. This is like a real whack Ghostbusters. I don't care about these characters. Will Smith is, even though it's funny, movies have always failed to capture what is likable about Will Smith. Have you ever noticed that?
Yeah, I have, because he's so self-satisfied and smug in this movie.
Ugh.
Yeah.
He's loathsome. And the worst part is, there is the scene that was in every single trailer where Will Smith puts on the Men in Black sunglasses, turns to Tommy Lee Jones and says, the difference between the two of them is, I make this look good. Tommy Lee Jones looks way better in those sunglasses.
He does.
That's just a fact. You need a face that looks like a hard side of beef like Tommy Lee Jones to make those sunglasses work. But yeah, it's so weird because, I mean, Will Smith was transitioning from a big TV star to, and also, I guess at that point, still considered a pop music star. And he did have a big hit with the title song for this movie.
Oh, why did you even have to mention it? Now it is earworming itself back into my head.
Yeah, and again, one of those things that you sit down and you listen to that song, you're like, this is just shitty Ghostbusters. Why didn't they get Ray Parker Jr. to rap it? But yes, there's not much it's funny. It's a good premise. The idea that there are that there's a secret service of sorts, a kind of underground police squad that are basically the alien police,
Mm-hmm.
and I love the idea. Maybe this is not intentionally a joke, but it's funny all the same, that the person in charge of keeping the universe safe is Rip Torn. But that was probably the only time I enjoyed the movie. It's got a typically Danny Elfman-y score, and I like typically Danny Elfman-y scores, so that's pretty fun. And Rip Torn is having a ball when he is on screen because he probably isn't sure if he's seeing puppets or is like, are these the things I usually see when I don't take my pills?
It's also interesting as a cultural artifact because between this and X-Files, you get the sense that back then the idea of having like a super professional, super capable body of government elites was something that was very reassuring.
Yeah.
And not only reassuring, but expected. That's not something that anyone seems to want to promote anymore.
Yeah, although at the very least, did Men in Black? Because again, I'm searching my memories of it. Did Men in Black have the distinction of being like, was it explicitly a government thing, or was it like, but we're independent of the government? We're the U.S. government doesn't know us. We're more of an international / universal collective who are really in charge of things. Was it that? Was it almost kind of like a replacement or not? I've already forgotten.
I feel like the president knew about them, and there was some cooperation there. But the fact that I can't remember if it was national or international, but that would be even more interesting because the idea of international cooperation over like a single topic is also something that is hard to imagine these days.
Yeah. At the same time, it's like Will Smith is so unlikable in that movie. You're rooting for the aliens.
And the irony is, apparently people liked his shtick in this so much that they let him do it again to even worse effect in Wild Wild West.
Yes, that's true. Wild Wild West, which also has an astoundingly banal pop song to accompany it, courtesy of the Smithster. If nothing else, at the very least, it has one thing that I remember that Men in Black does not have, which is that it ends with a giant mechanical spider for no reason. And if nothing else, I can't help but respect that. And also, if I recall Wild Wild West correctly, there is maybe subplot is too grand a word, but Kenneth Branagh's character has weird little decapitation magnets on people he does not like and wants to eliminate, and buzzsaws follow around these magnets so that when they catch up to you, they slice your head clean off.
Yeah, it's pretty gruesome, actually.
It's a great visual, but it's also like, what is it doing in this adaptation of like a well-remembered 60s, almost kind of like similar to the Avengers, like the British show, almost kind of a spy-fi vibe. Like, what is that doing in a remake of Wild Wild West, which everybody, or at least everybody of a certain age, really liked and found charming?
It was a strange time.
As I think I've mentioned to you guys before, I have a pathological inability to remember which one is Rip Torn and which one is Rip Taylor. So whenever I see Rip Torn's name on some credits, I always imagine it's going to be Rip Taylor first, and vice versa. And I imagine that would have been a very different movie.
Rip Taylor does not get a lot of actual acting roles. He usually just plays himself.
It's a tragedy.
Yes, it is. To think we were deprived of his Lear. But what's great about this little bit of name blindness, Chris, is that you never walk away disappointed. Unlike the far more common Bill Paxton, Bill Pullman thing, where you get very excited to sit down and watch your old buddy Bill Paxton in a movie, but you are instead saddled with the pillowy face of Bill Pullman.
So they spend very little time on Contact, because what can you say about it, really?
Yeah, it's very. It's not a terrible movie. It's just very bland and unimaginative.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, wasn't this based on a Carl Sagan novel?
Was it Carl Sagan or Whitley Strieber? Hold on.
Oh. If it's Whitley Strieber, then maybe that makes sense. But it was like, didn't Carl Sagan have something to do with Contact? Am I?
No, it is Sagan. Yes, you're right. It is Sagan.
Okay, yeah. Because I was going to say, this is surprisingly lucid for Whitley Strieber. But yeah, I remember seeing this. Contact was a movie that got a lot of hype, as though it was going to be the Close Encounters of its time. But it's just a really bland movie in which Jodie Foster says okay to go for a long time. There was an extremely good joke at its expense in an episode of South Park where a character says, I waited 90 minutes to see the aliens and all I saw was Jodie Foster's goddamn father.
You know, now that you mention it, this seems to be a really strong trope in sci-fi movies about, going into space or meeting aliens is
You meet your dad?
or death and longing is what's driving that desire. That's been in the movie with George Clooney and Sandra Bullock, whose name I am not remembering.
Gravity.
It's in that movie with they're talking to a bunch of Hepticons.
Oh, you're thinking of Arrival.
Thank you. And what's the other one? I am the recent one with Ryan Gosling, who is playing First Man. I actually remember the name of that one.
I was going to say Space Drive.
They're all like, the reason they're going to space is because they have been kind of winnowed out by grief. And I wonder why that is such a important connection for these movies to be making over and over again.
I guess that's interesting. I guess that at least when you're dealing with the logistics of realistically depicted space travel, then you have these confined sets that are overlit if they're going to look realistic at all, and you have actors who are largely covered up and often are going to be covered up by a big goofy helmet.
Right.
So there are so many barriers in terms of connecting with the story that you have to underline the humanity as much as possible, I think, to bring people along. Maybe that's the theory.
Yeah, just something, not a very funny thing to notice, but maybe a little bit profound. And on that note, let's go to Batman and Robin.
Yeah. Now, Beth, I have to ask, because Batman and Robin has this like legendary reputation as being like this all-time worst of the worst kind of movie. But when people say that, I'm always curious what movies they've seen.
Oh, well, I mean, they're right. This is a really, 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 really bad movie. This is Attack of the Clones, the one where you have the really stiff romantic dialogue and literal frolicking in a meadow.
Well, that's just it. Attack of the Clones, if nothing else, brought some much-needed entertainment to Star Wars, albeit unintentionally, in that I don't think there's anything salvageable in any of the prequels, save maybe Brian Blessed making noises to play one of the dinosaurs from Jim Henson's Dinosaurs. But it does have the scene in which Anakin and Padme have a discussion about whether or not they should surrender to their carnal urges. And Natalie Portman, in an amazingly delivered, I can't tell if it's just an actor lost in George Lucas's non-directing in front of a green screen, or if she's actually making fun of the material. But the fellow who plays Anakin turns to her and is like, I want to be your boyfriend, or whatever the hell he says. Yeah. And she says, but I'm a senator. And but I'm a senator is something that makes me laugh to this day.
Yeah, Batman and Robin. So for those who have not seen it, I mean, you had Tim Burton's first two Batmans that did very, very well and created this whole new feeling for the character. Mm-hmm. I love Batman Returns. I think that is the height of it. Catwoman is still like such an iconic creation for me.
Yeah, Batman Returns really promised something that the next two movies did not deliver.
And it was probably the change of director. So then Joel Schumacher came on in Batman Forever, which was not great, but not remarkably terrible. And then I guess he got enough confidence that he went ahead and did Batman and Robin. And his theory was, let's bring this back to the 60s.
Well, what's interesting about Batman and Robin, it's like, I guess a few things that come to mind. One is, if I recall the commentary, because when Batman and Robin came out on DVD, I was not a Batman and Robin super fan, nor have I ever been. But when you find out, they're releasing Batman and Robin with a director's commentary, you get that commentary because you want to know. Mm-hmm. You want to know, because what I kind of respect, with a big question mark next to it, about Batman and Robin is how not commercial it feels.
It starts with them rollerblading in black light.
But exactly.
How much more 90s can you get?
But who would want that from a Batman movie? Like, it's one of those things where no one would have greenlit this in terms of any kind of expectations for what it does. It's one of those weird boneheaded moments, like how there's a chunk of Octopussy in which Roger Moore is dressed as a clown in a weather balloon, and you're like, who likes James Bond movies? Who would want this? And that's kind of what I feel like from the commentary. What I recall is that most of the movie, which admittedly Schumacher assigns all the blame to himself, but he talked to the studio about what they wanted, because Batman Forever came about, and I think Batman Forever is the worst of the two Schumachers, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
Because it's so bland and middle of the road.
Well, I can see that, yeah, because I can see, like, in Adam's world, if you're going to go whole hog.
Exactly. Like, I don't want to watch a movie that is occasionally weird. What I appreciate about Batman and Robin is it really does feel like they gave, like, it was a child's dying wish to direct a Batman movie. And so that's what they did. But apparently this came out of Warner Brothers' desire to sell toys. So, and they gave him all the money. He's like, just make us a movie that can just sell a bunch of merchandise. And he's like, okay, what will we do? What's odd, and because oftentimes this movie gets compared to the Adam West series, of which I adore, but it feels nothing like it. It feels not like the Adam West series is witty, for one.
I think they were trying for it in terms of, like, Schumacher was going for camp.
Yeah.
The problem is
George Clooney, don't do camp.
No, none of them do. Chris O'Donnell's not camp.
He doesn't even do acting.
Silverstone is not camp. No, like, you just did not have the casts that could pull this off. I mean, even Schwarzenegger.
Well, Schwarzenegger's pretty campy. He's the saving grace of this movie.
No, the villains are both he and Uma Thurman. But what I always found the first disappointing thing I found was, like, I know enough about Batman. I always found the Mr. Freeze story to be genuinely affecting.
Oh, and what's interesting is that would have come about, like, his whole origin story really came about because of the animated series, which was really, between the movies, was the only one that was really doing Batman right, I think. Like, as fun as Batman Returns is as spectacle, and for its realization particularly of Catwoman, but I'm also very fond of its depiction of Penguin, I'll be honest with you. And I love Michael Keaton as Batman, but the Tim Burton movies don't do anything with the character, and they don't make the character interesting. The only thing that's interesting is that it's like, whoa, it's cool they got Michael Keaton to deliver this offbeat but weirdly engaging performance. I wish he was still a leading man. But with the Batman animated series, not only did you finally get a chance of Batman being a three-dimensional character, which frankly he usually isn't even in the comics,
right?
Mr. Freeze went from a gimmick villain to having that backstory. Like, that's something that Bruce Timm and Paul Dini came up with for the animated series. And it's beautiful. I believe they won an Emmy for the very first Mr. Freeze episode, and well deserved.
Yeah, it was really affecting, and I did not respect the fact that they just didn't take that opportunity to blow that out in a cinematic moment. I mean, I don't know if Schwarzenegger would have been up to the task, but give him a chance. He's been around. It's better than giving him lines like "ice to see you."
Yep. In fact, that's one of those things where, had there only been one or two ice puns, I would have hated this movie. But the fact that there's like 45 makes me really like the movie. I kind of, that's why, when someone tells me it's like, this is such a horrible movie and the worst movie ever, it's like, well, don't you kind of appreciate how weird it is?
I can see that. And it does have its defenders, especially among the queer community, because it has these camp elements. But I just think it doesn't have the opportunity to get there because of its main trio. Chris O'Donnell has never been good at anything.
No, he's quite terrible. But also, like, Alicia Silverstone got it right once.
She seems like she has a head injury in this movie. Like, the way she delivers dialogue is like it's slightly slurred, like she's just had a concussion and she's not quite sure what she's doing.
Yeah, it was around this time that Alicia Silverstone was starring in a film called Excess Baggage, and I thought, you know what, Alicia Silverstone is excess baggage in everything she stars in.
I mean, I liked her in Clueless. I think she was fine in there, so I think she has the capability, but she just they were just such duds. And even I'm surprised this did not derail Clooney's career, because he was just getting started in Hollywood doing A-list stuff and transitioning from ER. This could have derailed him completely.
Yeah, this could have really put a damper on what has actually turned out to be like a really huge career. But I guess that is the power of how well loved he was on ER, and it's, for me, like I'm speaking a little bit out of my element there, because the only times I ever caught like more than half of an episode of ER was long after he left,
right?
Well past its heyday, and he is just totally out of his element in the movie, which is a crying shame, because like George Clooney can be funny, George Clooney can be intimidating, George Clooney is a good star, he's a good leading man, and I believe it was Roger Ebert who said, you can't rate the Batman based on these movies, based on their performances, you can only rate them based on their chins, and George Clooney has the best chin of all. But yeah, the only real highlight, I guess, is Arnold Schwarzenegger tap dancing while wearing a polar bear slippers. That's a visual that I like, even though nobody else does. And briefly, Alfred the butler, which is Michael Gough as the one constant in all these movies, briefly turns into Max Headroom at the end, if you remember that subplot.
All right.
Yeah. So I can appreciate this movie's weirdness. It's not the greatest movie ever or anything, but it's a less silly Bane than what we got in the Christopher Nolan Batman.
Yeah, I'm not actually a big fan of the Christopher Nolan Batman.
No, I'm not a fan of gritty takes on pulp stuff, and I never will be.
So overall, I thought this had more energy than the previous one, and I thought it was a good idea to get them back into the theater. But I think I like their Oscar work more than their blockbuster work.
Yeah.
Just because there's more oddities there.
Yeah, at the very least. I didn't get too much out of these specials, though I remember the jokes better from the Little Gold Statue preview special on Comedy Central. But I will say, if nothing else, the Summer Blockbuster review was a pointed reminder to watch The Fifth Element early and often.
All right. If anybody wants to follow up on anything we talked about, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com. And we don't know yet what this episode is going to be, but you know. Maybe that'll give you a clue. All right. But until next time,
Lulu Data Multipass.
Ice will be back.
And we'll see you the next time we need to fill a little time in our summer of technical difficulties. And I got very annoyed. Very, very annoyed with them.